See the red dot?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Jo Reingold, and I'm here at the JCC with Andrea Weinstein, and we're talking about Federation and her time in Federation when she was president. Today is January 25th, and good afternoon, Andrea. Hello, nice to see you.
It's great to see you.
Thank you. Just tell us a little bit about how you came to be very active in the Jewish Federation of Dallas.
Well, I guess it's been about 54 years ago, since that's the age of my youngest son. And we had moved to Dallas. My parents had always been very, very active in the community. Federation wasn't probably a name even in my lexicon at that point. And we had been here a couple of months, I guess, and had gone to my parents' house for Shabbat dinner on Friday. And I told my parents, I really do need to have a conversation with you. And, okay. And so I told them that I was very proud of the commitment they had made to the Jewish community and to the congregation. But I really needed to let them know that Lauren, my husband, and I, that was simply not part of our makeup, and we were not really particularly interested in getting involved. And with that, maybe a few weeks later, my phone rang, and someone introduced themselves to me and said, I understand that you're new to Dallas. And I said, well, in a manner of speaking, I said I was actually born and raised here, but my husband and I have been living away for several years and have now come back. And she said, oh, well, that's great. She said, well, I am a liaison to the young women's.
Okay, continue.
So she tells me that the Federation Jewish community are in the process of helping to resettle some Polish refugees. And our Polish refugees were not Jewish.
Oh.
This was before the great influx from the Soviet Union. And I said, well, how are you helping them? And she told me, I said, well, that really sounds interesting. I don't know how many screws I had loose in my head at that time, but I did have a baby and two older kids, and I was doing a special project at that time for DISD at Hillcrest High School. So I said, that does sound interesting. And she said, well, I'll send you a note because we're going to have a meeting. I said, great. Next thing I knew, I was up to my ears in Polish Jews. Going to the airport, picking them up. Ray Andrus, may she rest in peace, would come with us because she spoke Polish. And we had no clue what we were doing. Harriet Hoffman, I think, was involved. Maybe even then I think Harriet was, because there were several of us. And going to the grocery store for them, setting up the apartments, getting the furniture, all of those things. And that was my story of jumping into the deep end of the pool. And I haven't figured out how to get out yet.
Who are some of the other people that you can remember that were active with you, that became some of the leaders in the community?
Well, Harriet Hoffman would be one. Janice and Arnie, of course, would be others, because I had grown up with Arnie, even though he was a few years older. But he and Janice became very good close friends, not living next door to each other yet. Well, Jimmy Hogue, because Jimmy and I had grown up together. I'm trying to think of Harlan and Hank Pollock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, there's so many.
That's okay.
So many.
What do you think at that point back then was the relationship? How can you describe the relationship between the Federation and the various synagogues?
I would say interesting, and it had not yet reached a relevancy stage. There were interactions, but you certainly didn't have the kind of relationship that we have now, where we put signs in the yards during campaign and all those kinds of things. I mean, that was off limits. You just didn't do that.
So what different portfolios and jobs did you have on your way up, getting more and more involved in the Federation?
Well, I guess I started out with a very nascent JCRC. It wasn't even called the JCRC then. Sid Stahl was the chair. Leon Rabin was a chair. I became very involved in Soviet Jury, along with somebody who we became very close, Judy Garden-Schwartz, who lived in Dallas for a short period of time and then left me and went back to Albuquerque. We are still very close. And we were just getting into all kinds of mischief with JCRC and the Soviet Jews who were coming, and we were literally all over the town having petitions signed, let my people go. There were all kinds of activities and programs, and a lot of that was done through the JCRC and its Soviet Jury Committee. And I eventually chaired that and began being asked to be on different kinds of committees. So I ultimately became a JCRC chair later on. But in the meantime, I began getting active on Federation committees. I even became active in the board of Shearith Israel, which was interesting. But I found, uniquely for me, even though it was before women were really advanced into any kinds of higher levels in terms of Federation leadership, but they had the women's division, which is very different. It was very different then. It was strictly raising funds, but the women were together on a board and were not really a part of the Federation hierarchy as such. I was involved a lot in campaign. Younger set, we were called in the good old days, and then once we graduated, and the age kept moving up. I think when we first got involved, the age limit to be in younger set was 35. I think by the time I finished, it was 45. So we did not give in readily, but those of us who knew
outside of the Jewish community at that time?
Well, at that time we did have what did we call it? The Organization of Jews and Christians. I can't remember the name of it, and I remember the name of the man. His name was Bill. I mean, he was the CEO of that group, and we did a lot of things together. So yes, that was happening. As the CRC became more involved and more, I would say, recognized, we did a lot of things in terms of government, and we were not yet going to Austin, but eventually we did. And we also worked that particular outside organization, so on. We did have a relationship with United Way.
Right.
And that was a funding mechanism, but we did have a good relationship with them. It's had its peaks and valleys, but I think at this particular moment it's good.
What was the relationship between the Dallas community and Israel when you were active?
I would say that it was very good. I mean, we were very supportive of Israel, and I know that from my parents when this community came together to support Israel's finally ascendancy to the world. There was a huge meeting in Chicago. Fanny Shannon was there, and my parents were invited to go, and my father said, "Why are you asking me? I don't have that kind of money." At any rate, it was the famous meeting when Jake Feldman rose to announce that he was giving this incredible gift to Israel. And I think that was a wake-up call. I think there were a lot of people who in 1948, I was only 8 years old, but who I think realized the importance of Israel, and rightly or wrongly, because and since the Holocaust.
Did the Federation, I'm just curious, have any specific projects or activities at that point about Israel, or not so much?
I think there were. I think at that time, and that's hard. You're really testing this old brain, not to confuse times and places. It just seems to me, as I look back on it, because it was a long time between that and the time I moved to Dallas in 68, when we moved here in 68. I had been exposed to a little bit when we were living in Denver, but, and I was very supportive, I was very aware of Israel, but I don't remember getting and seeing a relationship other than the dollars that were going. I don't remember trips going to Israel. Maybe there were.
Yeah, I was just curious when all that started, but
I think it was beginning with that trip that we took, because when we came back, we had more than drunk the Kool-Aid.
What year was that? Was your trip?
1974.
74. Okay. All right.
So, and some of us were all, I mean, it's not that we weren't involved at that time, and not even peripherally. I mean, because by 1974, you were already in the middle of the Soviet, immigration coming into the States, going into Israel. And we were very much a part of that.
Can you think of, besides Jake Feldman, some other people that were very instrumental and very, very generous in their support of the Federation and of Israel? Other people come to mind?
Well, Fanny Shannon, Bernie Shannon. If we walk out and look at the wall out there, I can tell you a lot. I'm trying to think who. Jack Kravitz was the CEO of the Federation at the time. So there would have been Mary Mumbus. Irvin Donsky.
Right. Can't forget him.
Never forget him.
Yeah.
Even my dad, Bill Waldman, who was a staunch supporter and fundraiser, and he was very much involved.
Well, that's pretty good for a start.
I mean, like I said, if I
That's
go
all
around
right.
and look at the timeline, I'll remember
Right.
lots.
What changes did you experience in your involvement with the Federation through the years? Can you pinpoint any specific changes that you saw?
I think acceptance was one. As a woman, knowing something beyond just being a woman and, doing things. I will say this, everything in which I participated, and I think I forgot some of them, but at any rate, I chaired almost every committee that could be chaired before I ever became even an officer. But that change to me was so incredibly critical. And I still believe firmly to this day that were it not for Ann Sikora.
So around what years was that?
Well, that would have been in the 90s, 80s too. I remember going on a budget, I was chairing a budget committee in 83, and I went on a trip to Israel to be a part of the UJA budget committee hearings, which was really kind of interesting since I was not the brightest ticket in the sky, having not learned nearly enough. But so that would have been, it was in the 80s and starting and going through into the 90s. Anne became the first woman president. And I found that there were I wouldn't call it wasn't fractures. It was just an inability to use my friend's greatest word he ever loved was gestalt. Understand the entire gestalt of what is the Federation. What does it encompass? What is its role? Is it only to raise money? Or is it a combination of things? Well, I think one of the things that I learned early on was, you had to have the money to do the projects and serve the community, the center, Golden Acres, the family service, all the traditional ones that we did do. But there were other ways of making the Federation a totality for the entire community, whether it was in fundraising, whether it was in projects, whether it was dealing with community service, in other words, taking into the whole all of the agencies that we were funding and having a better understanding of what they did and why they did it, as opposed to this being a budget item. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've fought long and hard for, I think even still today, was the Jewish Community Relations Council. And if I did one thing that I think has served me extremely well, it was that entire experience. Not only because of some of the people who were the directors, but of some of the people who understood why it was important. And it was important because I learned the art of communication. And I learned the art of being able to resolve issues that on the surface may have seemed irresolvable.
I was going to ask you, what years were you president? And I was about to say, what are you the most proud of during those years? But I think you covered with JCRC, but maybe there's something else also that you'd like to tell us about.
The years, I think it was 95 to 97, I think,
Okay.
I know it was somewhere in that period of time because I know I had 3 grandchildren, granddaughters, and that was my claim to fame. That was the first grandmother to be Federation president.
That's a good title.
I think something that occurred during the first 6 weeks of my presidency was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And that was a defining moment for any number of reasons. Not as president, but as the JCRC at that time was asked to help convene the community. There were all kinds of difficulties that one confronted then, and you asked about the relationship with the rabbis and the congregations. We began having a large influx of the Orthodox into the community, and that created a whole different dynamic when it came to relationships, at any rate. So we convened the Dallas Jewish community for a memorial for Rabin. And it was my job to be the main speaker at that event. I told David Stern, I said, no, I think you should be the speaker. For obvious reasons. But I said, no, you represent the Federation, that represents the community, and that's what we want you to do. I said, okay. What was so difficult about it was the man who had assassinated him was one of us. And trying to reconcile that with bringing this vast community together that was in, actually we were all just completely in state of shock, and had sat in front of the television for, probably 24 to 48 hours. And I had to figure out a way to say something that would not cool the waters and not say, you can't do this, you've got to come together and so forth, without offending anyone. So the only way I could think of doing that was a lesson I had learned somewhere sometime. I asked everyone in the congregation to stop and to think for a moment and take the hand of the person sitting next to them and understand that whatever we were going to understand from this tragedy, however we were going to deal with it, we were going to have to do it together. And I took that message, and it stayed with me through all the various things I've been privileged to do. Being a board chair of the Federation was an incredible experience. I learned a great deal. I also learned that when I had that gavel in my hand and someone who I thought very highly of was getting out of order and causing mayhem, and I did it once, I put the gavel down and I said, gentlemen, we're having a discussion. We're not having a yelling match. And if I need to adjourn this meeting, I will. Now, if you can, I didn't say play nice, that was the inference, then we can continue. So I learned that you could be pleasant and firm and understanding the communication that you had to have and you had to keep. My opinions were my opinions, but I was representing an entity, and therefore I had to not put mine aside, but use them in a way that would be productive and not productive. So during my tenure, we established a committee to discuss having the major fundraising for the community that was going to benefit all the synagogues and family service and build the capital campaign. We didn't put it together. I was happy to turn it over to the next president, but I was proud of that.
So the Federation did not have that prior to your tenure? It wasn't
No.
called capital campaign?
No.
Nothing like that?
Not in that sense, not involving everyone.
Wonderful.
So I was proud of that we got it put on the table, and Don Schaefer moved it out of there.
That's wonderful,
So,
really.
and there were other things that, simple things, just very simple things, meeting people for the first time, having the opportunity to be in places that I wouldn't have otherwise been.
From your time back in Dallas till now, how have you seen the Dallas Jewish community change?
Oh my gosh.
Just a few things. What do you think?
Well, I think one thing was, of course, that probably when I moved back here, we were probably a community of maybe 15,000, 20,000. I was then fortunate enough to chair the first demographic study we did, which showed that we had probably close to 35, 40,000, somewhere in that vicinity. That was a great opportunity as well. And of course, we learned a lot from that, and we didn't learn a lot from that, because I still think we were figuring out, you know, where do we belong? How do we do it? And the community was growing. It was growing north. Do we build north? Do we stay south? If it's not broke, do we try to fix it? All of those questions. And so that this community is probably now, I don't know, judging, I would say somewhere 50, 60,000. I know we're not as big as Atlanta, but we're a big Jewish community. And I think we have made tremendous inroads, not only into our own community, with all of its warts. It's one of my favorite statements. I make that statement about Israel all the time. I love Israel even with all of her warts. Well, I love this community even with all of our warts. And we probably will never figure it out in anybody's lifetime. But, so it's grown. I think we've grown nationally as well. That was another experience that I had as president in being on the national, so that we were an intermediate large, okay? And so I was on that committee through UJ, well, UJA Federation it was then. And I had the opportunity to meet so many people from like communities or from larger communities. And so having the opportunity to see what does a really large community look like, New York, for example. Well, I mean, that's out of the ballpark. It's just, it's not even apples and oranges, it's apples and zucchini. And, but yet, there are things to be learned. And I think today, we have our leadership, our Federation leadership, moving far more into the ins and outs of those various communities and on boards nationally. And we didn't really have that. I mean, someone would be on the UJ board or on the, Federation National Board. It's had so many iterations in its name. I think we still have trouble welcoming and making people feel a part of a community. That's very, very hard to do. And I think if you do it in small packages, in small areas where people have an opportunity to be in their own environments, I think the synagogues and the temples have played a role in that to the good. Because I think there is really an exceptional relationship now between the congregations and the Federation and the community in general, And so that's, as the saying goes, I think we've done good.
Is there anything else you would like to add to your story that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, the only thing would be the opportunity I had nationally. And because I had been involved in community relations and because the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, formerly known as NACRAC, was the national umbrella for all community relations agencies across the country. And it was located it partially had an office in New York and in Washington, D.C. for obvious reasons. And so I had been on their board for a long time. I became an officer, and my dear friend Marlene Gorin, who I got into mischief with for over 15 years, she kept encouraging me. And I said, Marlene, I'm not going to be, never mind. So eventually my never mind became okay, and I did become the national chair. And that was, trips to Israel, meeting with Salam Fayyad, meeting with Saeed Barakat, meeting with, I never met Abbas, but Salam Fayyad was is an amazing man. He actually lives in the United States now. Trips into Ramallah, Jordan, meeting with all of and that position alone allowed me to see the whole Middle East in that little spectrum, with all of its warts and all of its impossibilities and all of its possibilities. I got to go to a meeting in the Roosevelt Room of the White House shortly after Barack Obama was elected. And I sat around a table with 14 of the leadership, members of the heads of the major Jewish organizations. And I sat down at that table. And I said to myself, Andrea, you don't giggle in a room with the President of the United States, but I can't tell you how hard it was not to. It was amazing. He was incredible. Whether you liked him or didn't like him really didn't make any difference, because he was an incredible individual, and just, it was remarkable. And then one other exciting thing I got to do was go to his Hanukkah party, and which was at the White House, with all of the Christmas decorations, of course. But with the Marine Band playing, I had a little dreidel. And strictly glot kosher food, little lamb chops, banquet tables of food. And at that particular one, I turned around and looked straight in the face of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I felt like such an idiot. I said, Justice Ginsburg, you're an amazing woman. I thought, what a dumb thing to tell her. She knows that. So I chaired that for 2 years, and it was a very interesting time. And since I ran out of things to do, been to Israel a few more times, and I'm now a docent at the Holocaust Museum. Decided to do that after we went on the March of the Living. So that's where I am right now.
Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful and enlightening, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you've done and continue to do.
Well,
thank you.
It's been a good ride.
So far. Thanks.